It's a bird. It's a plane. No, it's Kirk Alyn's Memoirs of Superman. Recently, whilst perusing some vintage magazines, in this case, Fantastic Monsters of the Films from 1962, I found a fascinating article titled Memoirs of a Superman, written by Kirk Alyn himself. Kirk Alyn was, of course, the first in a long line of actors to play the Man of Steel. Since the piece is in public domain, I decided to share it with you. So, as they say, without further ado, I give you Kirk Alyn, Memoirs of a Superman. I guess every kid imagines at some time or other that he can fly or have other supernatural powers. Playing make-believe is one of the greatest pleasures of childhood, and I was growing up when the experience came to me, but it wasn't all pleasure, I can tell you that. I never dreamed when I left New York in 1941 to visit my friend Red Skelton in Hollywood that I would leave the Broadway stage for a motion picture career, much less that one day I would be wearing a skin-tight costume and saving the world. My first chance to be superhuman came through Republic Pictures, where I was working in westerns. This was in 1943, and the studio was planning to make a Captain America serial. Even though the role appealed to me, I had to refuse it as I had already signed with another studio for a musical. My second opportunity came 4 years later. I read in the Hollywood trades that producer Sam Katzman, for whom I had recently completed 2 features, Little Miss Broadway and Sweet Genevieve, was casting for the lead role in a serial based on the popular Superman. I'd been following Superman's adventures in the comic strips since 1940, and certainly knew what type of character he was, but I never gave the casting of the picture a second thought. So, it came as a genuine shock soon afterward to pick up the telephone and hear Sam Katzman tell me that he wanted me to play Superman in his serial. He asked me to rush down to his office at Columbia because representatives from Superman's publishing company, National Comics, were waiting to take a look at the fellow he had convinced them would be perfect for the part. And before I could say a word, Sam hung up. I wish that someone with a camera could have been there to capture the stunned expressions on the 2 national men when I walked into Sam's office. "This is Superman?" they cried in horror, pointing convicting fingers at me. Unfortunately, Sam hadn't given me the chance on the phone to explain to them that I was growing a beard and had let my hair grow for 2 months in order to play a role in another film. Sam remained confident, though, and he had me put on a pair of glasses and a hat over the beard and hair to display me as Clark Kent, Superman's secret identity. I was more than a little stunned when Mr. Katzman said, "Take off your clothes so you can flex your muscles." I told the national people that my qualifications for the newspaperman role included studying at Columbia University's School of Journalism, where I also wrote for the college paper. They didn't laugh, but said that, minus a heavy beard and with a good haircut, I would be acceptable. We began filming the picture in early January 1948 for summer release, but before I stepped in front of the camera as Superman, I spent a solid 4 weeks working out at a gymnasium getting in shape. I knew this was going to be a strenuous role because there would be no double for me. I was to do all of Superman's stunts myself. The first day of shooting finally came, and I remember how conspicuous I felt when I put on the pale blue and brown Superman costume for the very first time. The colors were changed for the original bright red and blue because the picture was in black and white, and reds and blues do not film well. I understand that when you test for a Tarzan picture, you wear yourself ragged. I wouldn't know about that, but I do know that being Superman is no easy job. The director, Spencer Bennett, who had directed me in the Republic serial a few years before, had me leaping, running, jumping, fighting, and carrying people around 8 to 10 hours a day for the entire 28-day shooting schedule. I was completely exhausted when I got home each night, and it came as no real surprise to discover that after the serial was finished, I had lost nearly 20 pounds. Superman was, in my opinion, a good serial filled with plenty of action and excitement. George Plimpton, Katzman's head writer, wrote a script that was very faithful to the comic book, telling of Superman's coming to Earth as a baby, his growth to supermanhood, and his adventure with the Spider Lady who was plotting to control the world. The casting of Superman's friends, Noel Nell as Lois Lane, Tommy Bond as Jimmy Olsen, Pierre Watkins as Perry White, realistically brought Superman's comic book companions to life. Spence Bennett, George Plimpton, and I spent many hours planning how I should play Superman and Clark Kent in the serial, and we decided, for example, that as Superman, I should never hit a bad guy with my fist because a real Superman would knock the fellow's head off with just a simple punch, being as powerful as he is depicted. So I had to tap the villains unconscious or knock their heads together lightly. We also had Clark change his voice whenever he spoke so that no one would guess that he and Superman were one and the same. And I even had to have a long curl hanging over my forehead, just like the character in the magazine. The serial was released in the summer of 1948, but by that time I had forgotten about it. I was then at Republic where I had to turn down a second superhero role, King of the Rocketmen, because I was shooting another film, Federal Agents versus the Underworld, with Rosemary LaPlanche and Carol Foreman, who played the Spider Lady, by the way, in the Superman picture. However, as fate would have it, Superman was so highly successful, it was made for $350,000 and grossed nearly $3 million. That, before I knew it, Sam Katzman was on the phone again telling me we were going to do a sequel, Atom Man versus Superman. All of the people in the first serial were gathered together again, and back I went to leaping, running, and fighting, but this time only losing 8 pounds. Plimpton's sequel had Superman crusading to save the world again, and it was just as well-paced as the original serial, though more fantastic. In one scene, I was sent into the empty doom far out in space, but using super wits, I managed to make it safely back to Earth. Directors, I have learned through the years of experience, have a habit of getting so preoccupied with their storyline that they sometimes forget that the fiction they are creating is not necessarily fact. Spence Bennett, though the most considerate director I've ever had, was no exception. For one sequence in Atom Man, I had to run into a burning barn, pick up an unconscious Lois and Jimmy, and carry one under each arm to safety. Noel, who was Lois, weighed 105 pounds, but Tommy Bond was a hefty 160. We rehearsed the scene 5 times to synchronize camera moves, special effects of the fire, and various other technicalities, and I was ready to call it a day. Then Spence said, "Okay, this will be a take." The camera rolled, and back I dashed into the barn, choking on the smoke, lifted Lois and Jimmy, all 265 pounds, and ran back out past the camera, trying hard not to drop them, and Spence yelled, "Cut, cut, cut," and came up to me. "Kirk," he said, dead serious, "this will never do. You're straining yourself. I can see the veins popping on your neck." He was actually shocked to hear me say, "Jeepers, Spence, I'm only a human being, not a real Superman, and those are real people I'm carrying." Whenever we get together today, 12 years later, we still laugh about this incident. I spent one entire day dangling 15 feet above the ground in front of what is known as a process screen showing a film of moving clouds. A giant wind machine was facing me off camera, making it seem as if I were actually flying. The special effects men strung me up with wires encased in a metal breastplate. It was pure torture being suspended. Just lie with your chest on a chair, just as lying with your chest on a chair, and keeping your legs stiffly on a line with your torso, and you can get an idea of the back-breaking effect I was going through. But it was even more discomforting when the cotton lining of my metal suit caught on fire. I was flying beside an airplane with a burning bomb that was attached to its wing, and the strong gust from the giant wind machine blew the sparks down my neck. I tried beating at my chest, forgetting that I was wearing armor. In desperation, I yelled at the effects men to bring me down fast, and they poured buckets of water between my chest and the suit, nearly drowning me, but finally putting out the fire. The frustrating and costly thing about the 14-hour day's shooting was that very few of the agonizing flying scenes were used in the final release print. Almost all of the film had to be junked and the sequences redone because the wires were visible. Incidentally, a few heads rolled because of this. After the release of the serial, I went on to tour as Superman with a troupe of Hollywood stars, leading men and comedians, staging baseball games across the country for charity. And I must admit, I was rather reluctant to appear in public as Superman. There was always the possibility that someone out in the audience would decide to find out for himself if bullets really did bounce off my chest. The highlight of the ball games was Superman's appearance, which was handled very dramatically. The games, instead of only 3 innings, became, because of the close scores, like 106-99. At the bottom of the third, Superman's team would be losing, but they'd have the bases loaded. Only a home run would save the day, and the batter had a 3-2 count on him. The next pitch would tell the story. Over the PA system, Gary Moore, our announcer, would say, "It looks bad for the actors. They need a homer to win, and they're sending in a pinch hitter. Who can it be? Who can save the game for them?" And by this time, everyone had his eyes on our dugout, and Gary would continue. "Looks like there's only one man for the job, and yes, they're sending him in. It's Superman." And I would run from the dugout with cape flying, swinging, a couple of dozen balsa wood bats, while the crowd went half mad with excitement during the confusion. The comedian pitcher would substitute a plaster of Paris baseball for the real one. I'd swing at the first pitch, and after pointing towards the fence like Babe Ruth, and when I connected with the ball, it would disintegrate. All of the players would stare up at the sky, tracing the ball's stare, our imaginary flight, into outer space, and we scored the winning runs. As I walked up to the plate on opening day at Soldiers Field in Chicago, at least a dozen photographers and newsreel men were squatting around to get a scoop of Superman at bat. When I pitched, when the pitch came, it was low, and I had to break my swing to keep from cracking a few heads and cameras. The crowd roared and held their sides. Superman, like the mighty Casey, had struck out. And you could hear the repercussions clear back to Hollywood. However, our umpire, Hopalong Cassidy, no less, awarded me another pitch on a technicality, being fair, and square as he was. After the tour, I went to Republic for Radar Patrol serial, then back to Columbia to star as the comic book character Blackhawk. Shortly before making Blackhawks, I signed to play opposite Leona Massey on Broadway in Angel in Paris, and as it turned out, this was one of the reasons for my not being available to portray another superhero, Flash Gordon, in a TV series filmed in Germany. A day or two before I left for New York, I was called about playing Superman again, now on TV. I had to refuse the part because of my Broadway commitments. People have asked me if I ever met George Reeves. I knew of him, of course, since he was Superman on television, but we had never met until 1958, shortly before his untimely death. I was with my New York agent in his office at General Artists Corporation when one of the other agents stuck his head in the door and said, "Guess who I have in my office? Superman, that's who." Whereupon my agent calmly pointed at me and said, "Yeah? Well, here's the original Superman." George and I met halfway between the two offices and then had lunch together, discussing the many hazards of being a Superman. On comparing notes, we had quite a few laughs. This was the only time we ever met. Even though I have played heroic roles, and Superman in particular, I'm afraid that none of those amazing powers have rubbed off on me, and I'm sure that if someone sent me to the empty doom, I'd never make my way back. I've yet to test out my flying abilities. For the present, I think I'll just stick to TWA's fan jets. And that is the memoirs of a Superman. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care, God bless, and have a great day.